Thank you, Chair. And to my colleagues, I'm here to testify on H3 541, a resolution calling on Article 5 of the United States Constitution for the convening of a convention of states. Chairpersons and fellow committee members, I come to discuss a matter of profound importance to our Commonwealth and our nation, the support of resolutions calling for a convention of states under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. The Constitution, a timeless testament to the vision of our founding fathers, provides two methods for its amendment. One is through Congress, and other is through a convention of states. Today, we consider the latter, a powerful yet cautiously used mechanism designed to ensure that the ultimate sovereignty in our republic rests with the people through their states. In advocating for a convention of states, we reaffirm the fundamental principle that states are crucial custodians of our democracy. This process empowers states to address critical national issues, ensuring that local voices are not just heard, but are instrumental in the constitutional process. Our nation faces challenges unforeseen by our predecessors, whether it's fiscal responsibility, term limits, or other pressing national issues. A convention of states offers a platform to address these concerns directly, reflecting the evolving aspirations and needs of our citizens. Concerns regarding the scope and nature of such a convention are valid. However, history and legal framework provide guidance. Clear precedents, rules, and the requirement of ratification by 3/4 of the states serve as robust safeguards against potential excess. 19 states have already passed the Convention of States resolution. We need 34 states to get a convention, and it takes 38 states to ratify any amendments that are proposed. As citizens of Massachusetts, a state with a rich history of leadership and innovation in our nation's founding and development, we have a unique responsibility. Our support for an Article 5 convention is not just a procedural stance, but a continuation of our enduring commitment to active and thoughtful participation in the shaping of our union. Our involvement ensures that the values and concerns of our Commonwealth are part of this vital national conversation. In light of these considerations, I urge my esteemed committee and my fellow legislators to support the resolutions for an Article 5 convention. In doing so, we take a step towards addressing the pressing needs of the issues of our time through a process that embodies the principles of federalism and democratic engagement enshrined in our Constitution. Thank you for your attention to this matter, this considering of a pivotal step in our nation's ongoing journey towards a more perfect union. I respectfully ask for a favorable vote on H3 541. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions? Is there any questions? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So, is this panel? Senator Kennedy, is he there?
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to recognize Representative Shirley Arriaga, who is here virtually. And I'd like to call up Vincent Dixon. Vincent Dixon.
Speak up. Yes, hello, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, committee, chairs, senators, representatives, and staff. My name is Vincent Lawrence Dixon of 60 Lake Street, Unit N, Winchester, Mass. 01890. This testimony is a condensed sequence supporting the passage of three distinct resolves, S2334, S2333, and S2332. Three distinct issues. I'll try to keep it as close to 3 minutes as I can. A Syrian War Crimes Tribunal, support of NATO, and support of a federal ERA. The first one, referencing 2334, memorializes the Massachusetts delegation and the United States Congress on the need for a Syrian War Crimes Tribunal. I'll make sure that I file additional testimony by the written form. Syria is one of the many situations in the world which has, in fact, meets the standards of genocide, a massive slaughter by a government that has never won a free election in our lifetime. And it is, in fact, until the Ukraine situation and genocide, the worst genocide since World War II. Millions of Syrians have been killed, had their homes destroyed, or been forced to leave, and the regime does not follow a rule of law. There is a need for the invoking of the Genocide Convention, which the United States not only signed, but President Reagan submitted and obtained ratification by the U.S. Senate. Various actors are responsible. This recommends that Massachusetts would inform its congressional delegation of the opportunity to follow the rule of law and to look at these issues in a very important set. There has been some movement on this, but more needs to be needed. And remember, Massachusetts, all the way back in the 1800s, was focused in its local government. It did make resolutions on abolition and other important issues, and I think this is well within that tradition. The next bill is relating to support for NATO. NATO is, in fact, a supranational body. It has an Atlantic Council, which is essentially their parliament, where, in fact, we as a member nation, the United States, helped in many ways. And the significance of this, of course, is that it is United States leadership and international cooperation, and NATO has been quite successful in this. And though there are problems and we've had failures, the Balkans stand as a particular lighthouse, if you will, to freedom and NATO involvement there that has facilitated the independence of a number of countries that otherwise were under totalitarian rule. And it provides a bulwark for the safety of much of Western Europe, which over 60 plus years has not experienced a war. Think of the fact that for the first time in centuries, people can see their children grow up, see their grandchildren, make plans for the future as opposed to plans for the next war and the next destruction. So I would support your support of that. And the final one is relating to the Equal Rights Amendment at the national level. This is S2332. There are many debates about this, but in fact, the U.S. House took action and, in fact, has recognized now 38 legal ratifications. The U.S. Senate took a vote, 52 senators supporting that. There is the artificial 60-vote standard they have, so it has not been actually passed in that narrow sense. But in fact, the 14th Amendment was passed and recognized the ratifications of all states, and Congress at the time, the precedent that remains, indicated that you may ratify an amendment that has been properly sent out, but may not withdraw that. So, in fact, the ERA appears to have been, by the view of many, to have been legally ratified but not implemented, because the prior administration had the White House counsel, who is not mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, send a letter to the Archivist of the United States indicating the Constitution should not be published with the Equal Rights Amendment as ratified. The present administration has indicated it's up to Congress. I think that Massachusetts, as a leader since 1976, we've had a Massachusetts ERA, which has worked quite well for most of us. And the majority of the population in this age ought to be welcomed to the full protection of the law, the equal protection of the law, and all the other constitutional guarantees that we treasure and people speak of so well. So I would ask your consideration of these three particular resolves and the issues. I will send additional testimony, both this umbrella and the indicating of the particular resolves and resolutions. With respect, these are issues that many people say, well, what do they have to do with Massachusetts? They have to do with everything, in the sense that we are a state, a commonwealth that welcomes people from throughout the world and has been successful because of that. And I think that these three resolves, if passed, would strengthen that legacy. I, as a historian, am certainly familiar with that, and do presentations that reference in this period of the 250th anniversary of the United States and the great observances such as the Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, and others upcoming in 2025. I thank you for your time. We chose to not risk our circumstances coming into Boston from Winchester. We appreciate that this is a hybrid hearing and the strengths and opportunities and the limits thereof. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Dixon? Thank you. Next, we have Representative Elliott. I'd also like to recognize Representative Estella Race, who is here, and Senator Mike Rush, who are both here virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the distinguished committee that I'm honored to serve on. I'm a co-sponsor of House Bill 3507, along with my colleagues from Lowell in the Senate, Senator Kennedy and Representative Howard, who are the original filers of the bill. I co-sponsored this piece of legislation to adopt the accompanying resolution condemning the persistent oppression of free and fair elections and human rights violations in Cambodia. The Hun Sen government took control of political power in Cambodia in 1985 and has since been using his political power to consolidate authority over the nation's government and electoral structure. The adoption of this resolution speaks to the many oppressive tactics employed by the existing Prime Minister since the Paris Peace Accords in 1991. European countries, the United States, many other countries around the globe have denounced these sham elections held in Cambodia in the last 38 years under his control in Cambodia. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I can tell you personally I have traveled to Cambodia on 2 occasions at my own expense. One as the mayor of the city of Lowell, and the second time as a citizen traveling to remote parts of the country distributing humanitarian supplies. I have seen and I have heard for myself from the people of throughout Cambodia about their misfortune under this autocratic government. As I traveled in 2017, the year before the national election, I witnessed and I learned of the fear of people concerned with free speech and the barrage of propaganda by the Hun Sen government. I personally visited 10 incarcerated mothers, grandmothers in prison while they were merely speaking out for their rights. In November of the same year, the government dissolved the major party in Cambodia, the Cambodian National Rescue Party. I ask you, can you imagine if the President of the United States dissolved either the Democrat or the Republican parties here? And this is what took place in Cambodia. One-person rule, silencing anyone who speaks. On behalf of the 25,000 Cambodians or more Americans that live in Lowell, Massachusetts, and the many of thousands that do live throughout Massachusetts and hundreds of thousands throughout the nation, we hope this resolution passes, that Congress and the President will take actions to condemn the oppression of its people and to implement recommendations of the United Nations Special Rapporteur of Human Rights in Cambodia to preserve and promote democracy and further erosion of human rights. I thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee for your time and consideration, and do hope this is reported out favorably.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions? You see any questions for us? Are there any questions virtually? I don't see it. I don't see it. Okay. I'd like to call up Paul Anderson. Okay, sure. Let's go.
It's a pleasure to be here. Real honor to be at the State House. I have a keen appreciation for American history and Massachusetts history. Just a little bit of history on how I got interested in this. My grandfather's name was Frank Moore. He was the last surviving World War I vet in Peabody, Massachusetts. As a kid, I used to sit at the kitchen table and listen to war stories. And when my grandmother wasn't there to police, once in a while, his stories would get more grim. And I remember one story, he was relating that it was his job to keep the rats off the bodies of his fallen friends. And I think from a young age, I was thinking, there's got to be a better way to solve international problems than humans killing each other. As a young man, in my 20s, I read The Anatomy of Peace by Emery Reeves, and I read Einstein on peace. He has a lot to say about, what do you think is needed? A stronger United Nations, with federal union powers. And I got a hold of HCR 64. This was adopted by Congress in 1949. This was the foreign policy of the United States, and I'll read it really quick. Resolved by the House of Representatives, the Senate concurring, that it is the sense of Congress that it should be the fundamental objective of the foreign policy of the United States to support and strengthen the United Nations and seek its development into a world federation open to all nations with defined and limited powers adequate to preserve peace, prevent aggression through the enactment, interpretation, and enforcement of world law. This was the foreign policy of the United States in 1949. It had 111 co-signers, including John Kennedy, Gerald Ford, both sides of the aisle, Hubert Humphrey, and I was shocked to read that. But anyways, I read that and I was inspired by that, to know that. It was kind of after the sobering shock of a world war, they wanted to make sure it never happened again. And so I drafted 2312, which is under consideration, based verbatim on that. And then I got curious. I went to the JFK Library and did some research. JFK attended the UN Founding Conference. I didn't know that. And this is fresh out of World War II. And I found this letter to Jim, and I've sent it to the committee. And I was shocked to read. He's bitter about the UN conference, that it wasn't given governing teeth. And he's very adamant about it. He said, the UN should have compulsory jurisdiction, and he goes on. He doesn't mince words, and I was amazed to find that. So, and I should mention too, after I read Anatomy of Peace, I worked with former presidential candidate John Anderson. He ran as an independent in 1980, and he became head of the World Federalist Association, advocating World Federation. And we put a question on the Lexington-Lincoln ballot. This is back in 1994. But we were attempting sort of a ground up by the people approach. And then in this letter to Jim, JFK mentions it must rise from the people. It can't come from the top down. So it was fascinating reading that, and that's a bit of the history.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Pleasure.
Are there any questions from the committee? Thank you. The panel. I'd like to call up Senator Kennedy and Representative Howard. Oh, they're virtual. Testifying virtually.
Yep. Mr. Chairman? Right, I'm ready to go if you're ready.
We're ready, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Velas, Chairman Cassidy, members of the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs. I'm pleased to be testifying today along with Representative Vanna Howard in support of Senate Bill 2326 and House Bill 3507. Both are resolutions condemning political oppression and encouraging free and fair elections in Cambodia. As you may be aware, my hometown of Lowell is home to the second largest Cambodian American population in the United States, the vast majority of whom are either refugees or the family members of refugees who fled during the Cambodian genocide from 1975 to 1979 and the subsequent 12-year civil war that occurred afterwards. On October 23rd, 1991, the dream of democracy in Cambodia was given hope through the Paris Peace Accords. The 19-nation international agreement sought to resolve political conflict and turmoil in Cambodia by setting forth the right to self-determination of its people through free and fair elections. Significant expenditures in the form of international aid have been made in order to promote a pluralistic, multi-party democratic system in Cambodia. Although elections have been held in Cambodia for the past 23 years, international observers agree they have been far from free and fair. Prime Minister Hun Sen has been in power in Cambodia since 1985 and has consolidated his authority over the nation's government, granting control of every state agency and security apparatus to his political party. The government of Cambodia has engaged in oppressive tactics aimed at limiting conditions that are intrinsic to a democratic state, including the restriction of its media environment by ordering radio stations to cease operations and by arresting journalists. Leading opposition parties have been dissolved and opposition party leaders have been arrested or exiled in an effort to repress viable political challenges. I first filed this legislation in a previous session in response to the 2018 election, the first in Cambodia following the dissolution of the opposition. I was a part of the Lowell City Council that year that voted unanimously on a resolution recognizing that the election was fraudulent. In the years since we have first pursued this legislation, the government of Cambodia has held another sham election, most recently this summer. This issue has widespread support in the city of Lowell and bipartisan support nationally. Lowell's Congresswoman Lori Trahan has co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to direct the president to impose sanctions on Cambodian officials who are responsible for anti-democratic actions and human rights violations. Senator Ed Markey and our former governor, Utah Senator Mitt Romney, has joined other federal lawmakers from both parties in announcing a resolution commemorating the landmark of the Cambodia-Paris peace agreements. The Massachusetts legislature has a chance to join with other defenders of democracy in supporting these two bills. This resolution would simply send a message to our federal partners and our constituents, particularly those of Cambodian American descent, that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts stands with them in opposition to political oppression and joins in the hope for fair and free elections to finally arrive in Cambodia, as was promised way back in 1991. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for letting me go a few seconds over the 3-minute mark.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your testimony. Representative Howard?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Capano, Chair Velas, Chair Cassidy, and esteemed members of the Joint Committee on Veteran and Federal Affairs. Thank you for taking me out of order. I am here to testify in support of Bills H 3507 and Senate 2326, a resolution condemning political oppression and encouraging free and fair elections in Cambodia. I co-filed with Senator Ed Kennedy. It was 32 years ago, last October, when the Paris Peace agreement was signed to end decades of conflict in Cambodia. Prime Minister Hun Sen in office for almost 4 decades, since 1985. However, since then, human rights violations and threats to democratic values by Prime Minister Hun Sen continue to undermine the rights of the Cambodian people. My fellow Cambodians and Cambodian American citizens continue to live under the rule of Prime Minister Hun Sen regime, despite being signatories to the very accords. Prime Minister Sen has undermined the accord's basic principle by violating and restricting the rights and well-being of the Cambodian people. He has suppressed opposition parties such as the Candlelight Party and the Cambodian National Rescue Party. What we all want, whether you live here in the great city of Lowell, Massachusetts, or abroad, or anywhere in this country, is for Cambodia to be prosperous, democratic, and independent country where all voices are heard. Cambodian people should be allowed to exercise their voice and choice in shaping the future of their country and not compromising the true spirit of the country's constitution. It is my hope Cambodia will restore the multi-party system in democracy, reverse the convictions of government critics, and allow independent media outlets to resume immediately without any interference. Free and fair elections are a vital component of a democratic state in the protection of the liberty and human rights of its citizens. And that's the true definition of democracy. Last month, I joined Senator Ed Markey, Congresswoman Lori Trahan, and members of the Cambodian community in calling for the immediate release of innocent Cambodian political prisoners, at least about 250 of them, who are falsely imprisoned on baseless charges, including attorney Thierry Sain. The U.S. Department put out a press release following the July 23rd, 2023 national elections in Cambodia, and I quote, "The United States is troubled that the July 23rd Cambodian national elections were neither free nor fair. Ahead of the elections, Cambodian authorities engaged in a pattern of threats and harassment against the political opposition, media, and civil society that undermine the spirit of the country's constitution and Cambodia's international obligation. These actions deny the Cambodian people a voice and a choice in determining the future of their country," end quote. I respectfully urge the committee to report these bills out favorably. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative. Is there any questions from the committee here? Representative Saros?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Howard, your comments are powerful, and I know your backstory, and I'm proud to serve with you here in the State House. So you not only speak as a state representative, but your family live this. And if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm sorry, Rep, could you please tell?
If you don't mind, could you just tell us a little bit about your backstory and your family's
Yes.
background?
Yes, thank you, Rep. I resettled in this country, in the United States, as a refugee. I arrived in the United States at the age of 11, having lived in the refugee camp in Thailand for 2.5 years. But prior to that, I'm a genocide survivor. I lived through the 4 years under the Khmer Rouge regime, where 6 of my immediate family members were killed, slaughtered, and starved. That was my father, my 3 younger siblings, and 2 of my maternal grandparents. And so I lived it. I know what it's like to live under oppression of the current government.
Thank you. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other questions? Thank you so much for your passionate testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I'd like to call up the next speaker, Senator James Eldridge.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. To the interim chair, to Chair Vilas, Chair Cassidy, and members of the Joint Committee, excuse me, on Veterans and Federal Affairs. I'm here to testify in support of my bill, which I've co-filed with Representative Carmine Gentile. It is Senate 2319, Resolutions for United States Constitutional Amendment and a Limited Amendment Proposing Convention, also known as the We the People Act. This is a bill that I began filing shortly after the infamous Supreme Court decision of Citizens United in 2010. And it really highlights the reality that we all live in across party lines, is the corrupting influence of big money in our political process and how that impacts policy, how that impacts people running for office. And again, this goes back to the Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission Supreme Court decision, which removed restrictions on independent political spending, enabling corporations and other outside groups to spend unlimited amounts on federal elections as well as state elections. And you're certainly seeing that as any one of us that is looking at some of the New Hampshire primary races, you're seeing this unlimited amounts of money being spent, and that will only increase in the general presidential election and federal races across the country. Since that decision, there have been massive increases in political spending from outside groups, dramatically expanding the already outsized political influence of wealthy donors, corporations, and special interest groups, having a dramatically negative impact on the public interest. What this bill would do would create an opportunity for the Massachusetts legislature to weigh in opposition to that decision. We have passed a resolution opposed to Citizens United, but I do think it's time for more aggressive change. And so, according to Article 5 of the United States Constitution, it requires Congress to call a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution upon the application of 2/3 of state legislatures, so that'd be 34 state legislatures, for a specific issue. So what the We the People bill is part of a nationwide effort to pass in 34 states a bill that would make it clear that Congress and state legislatures can regulate political spending and get back to some common sense political spending laws. This legislation calls on Congress to propose a constitutional amendment to affirm that the rights protected by the United States Constitution are the rights of real people only, in other words, not corporations, and would allow for limits on political contributions and to decree that the expenditure of money to influence elections is not protected free speech under the First Amendment. Just to provide a few more details, because some people have questions about how this works. If Congress were not to act within 6 months of the passage of legislation, it would become an application for convention for the purpose of proposing this specific amendment to the Constitution. And the Massachusetts petition would not be considered by Congress until 28 other states submitted applications for the same purpose. So again, there would have to be identical legislation passed in 28 states. I think this is something that is in some ways a last option, but I think it's something we need to do because clearly Congress in its current form is not going to regulate political speech, and our state is limited from making changes because of this Supreme Court Citizens United decision. So thank you so much for taking me out of turn. Thanks for consideration of the bill, and proud once again to file this bill with Representative Carmine Gentile. Thank you.
Senator Eldridge, thank you so much for your advocacy on this bill and so many others. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator Eldridge.
Thank you.
And as a brief point of order, just want to thank my good friend here, Rep. Capano, filled in as the acting chair, did a great job, was listening in, and I want to apologize. The Vilas household had a canceled daycare, and then the weather was a little slow coming down here today. So we're going to try to get this going. And calling the next witness, we have Mr. William Kilmartin from the Massachusetts Citizens Commission testifying virtually. Mr. Kilmartin? All right, moving on, we will come back. Next up, we are now on Jeff Foster, Nancy Brumback, Bonnie Grenier, and Suzanne Brock, here testifying virtually from Common Cause and the League of Women Voters.
Good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Glad you made it safe. Welcome. Good afternoon, Chair Vilas, Vice Chair Capano, and honorable committee members. My name is Jeff Foster. I'm the Director of Common Cause Massachusetts. I'm joining today alongside my colleague Nancy Brumback and others from the League of Women Voters to represent our collective opposition to Bills H-3502 and S-2319 and other resolutions before this committee proposing to call for an Article 5 constitutional convention. Throughout our 50-year history, Common Cause has fought the corrosive influence of money in politics and has worked hand in hand with many of the sponsors of this legislation to overturn the Citizens United decision. We've pushed for resolutions calling for a constitutional amendment and led local and statewide ballot efforts. That said, we strongly and respectfully oppose the tactic of calling for an Article 5 convention. An Article 5 convention has never been called before in American history, and we should not try to have one at this extraordinarily politically factious time. Because there's no way to limit a convention's focus, any constitutional issue could be brought up and fundamental rights could be undermined, including marriage equality, civil rights and civil liberties, voting rights, and privacy rights, among others. It's widely understood that a convention, once called, could consider any amendments that the delegates want to consider. That is true regardless of the restrictions a state might include in its call for such a convention. S-2319 and H-3502 call for an amendment or a convention to deal specifically with the issue of campaign finance. While our campaign finance system needs to be changed, a constitutional convention is not the right path to make that change, especially the fact that a subject matter restriction is not possible. It should also be noted that there are other efforts led by wealthy conservative special interests to call for an Article 5 convention. One of these convention campaigns focused on enacting a federal balanced budget. An amendment has passed already in 28 states. We're just 6 states away from the 34-state constitutional requirement to call such a convention. Others include some very disturbing right-wing proposals to significantly rewrite the Constitution overall. In theory, convention applications on different subjects could even be counted toward one convention call, although this has not happened to date. While we do not believe that Congress or any other governmental or judicial body should count convention applications in this way, and the legislation before you specifically prohibits it, the Constitution does not give any guidelines on how convention applications should be counted. Last session, we were happy to see that although this similar bill was passed favorably out of the committee, neither the House nor the Senate took any action. In fact, Massachusetts hasn't passed an Article 5 resolution in nearly 50 years. Let's keep that streak going. We respectfully urge you to amend this bill to remove the call for a convention, study it further, or oppose it. Thank you. I'll now pass it to Nancy Brumback.
Thank you.
Hello, Senator Vilas and Representative Capano and other members of the committee. I am Nancy Brumback, testifying for the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, representing our 43 local leagues that serve about 100 communities across the Commonwealth. The League strongly opposes S-2319 and H-3502 resolutions for United States constitutional amendment and a limited amendment proposing convention. The League of Women Voters opposes any calls for an Article 5 constitutional convention until specific legal rules governing such a convention are in place. Certainly, the League supports the underlying purpose of these resolutions to undo the impact of Citizens United decision and to reform our campaign finance system. We support various legislative actions at both the state and federal levels to do that. Should a constitutional amendment be decided to be necessary, the League feels it should be handled the same way as every other amendment to our Constitution, passed by Congress and ratified by 3/4 of the state. Our concern with these resolutions and with the other bills and resolutions before this committee calling for Article 5 constitutional conventions is the absence of any rules in place to govern such a convention, and therefore the potential for damage to the entire structure of our democracy. There is no precedent for an Article 5 constitutional convention, and despite the best efforts of the opponents of these resolutions to limits to such a convention, there's no guarantee those limits would be legally. No, delegates chosen by an unknown process and bound by unknown or no rules might do. These concerns led the League to adopt a national position in 2016 that the following legal requirements must be in place before a constitutional convention is called. The convention must be transparent and not conducted in secret. Representation should be based on population rather than one state, one vote, and delegates should be elected rather than appointed. Voting must be by delegate, not by state. The convention must be limited to a specific topic. Only state resolutions on a single topic count when determining if a constitutional convention should be called, and other similar legal requirements. Unless and until Congress enacts legislation establishing such legal parameters, the League opposes any calls for an Article 5 constitutional convention. Several of our local leagues are also concerned at the prospect of such a convention. With me today is Bonnie Grenier of the Marblehead League and Suzanne Brock of the Cape Cod Area League. And I'll turn it over first to Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Good afternoon.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can, but with an interesting background noise going on.
I know.
Now you're muted.
I think I can be on twice.
Oh, I'm being told you're on twice? On two different...
I am. Can you get rid of one?
Yes, please.
Oh. Am I on now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, I apologize. I have no idea.
It's not a problem.
This is my first time, so I'm a little nervous. My name is Bonnie Grenier. I live in Marblehead. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Marblehead, I want to thank the committee for this opportunity to speak in opposition to H3502 and S2319. The members of our league want to be clear that we support the positions of the State League to limit the influence of corporate and dark money in our political system and call for publicly funded election campaigns. However, like the State League, we cannot support this particular legislation because it requires that if Congress fails to act on it within 6 months of its passage, the resolution constitutes a petition to the Congress to call a limited convention for the exclusive purpose of proposing constitutional amendments. All amendments to the Constitution, including the 19th Amendment that gave women the vote, have been enacted through Congress. An Article 5 convention is a huge unknown. Despite some assurances that our founders put numerous safeguards in place to ensure that a convention would never run away, the reality is there are diametrically opposing opinions on this issue. Some constitutional scholars have asserted that once convened, there are no limits on what the convention can do. There's no way to predict what the final rules voted by convention delegates might be. The safeguard requiring final ratification by 38 states could be potentially eliminated. That would be a disaster in the making. In 2016, Convention of States Action conducted a simulation of what an actual convention might be like. If and when a convention comes to be, they will undoubtedly have developed a well-thought-out strategy to accomplish their agenda. It would be naive to underestimate the determination and ability of any one group to control the narrative of a convention. Several pieces of legislation have been introduced to address the structure and guidelines for an Article 5 convention, but all have languished in Congress. Wouldn't it be advisable to wait until there was a formal and binding structure in place before going this route to reform our campaign finance system? The Marblehead League of Women Voters asked this committee not to report H3502 and S2319 out of committee. And we thank you for your consideration. And now I will pass this to Sue Brock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
We can hear you twice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Brock, and I live in Dennis, Mass, on Cape Cod, and I'm here to represent the Cape Cod League. In agreement with the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area, representing more than 100 members from Mashpee to Provincetown, strongly opposes any effort to call for a constitutional convention under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, and therefore opposes H. 3502 S. 2319, the resolutions for United States constitutional amendment and a limited amendment proposing convention. Although the League shares the proponents' opposition to the Citizens United decision and supports the need for campaign finance reform, such as limits to dark money in elections, full disclosure of political contributions, and public financing of elections, we believe that such reforms should be enacted legislatively in a safer and more focused manner. The fact that our federal legislators have made no attempt to address these issues due to the incredible division in our country suggests that any attempt to address them in a constitutional convention could lead to some ugly, unplanned, and dangerous outcomes, including unintended dangers to our democracy. There is no precedent for an Article 5 constitutional convention, and despite the best efforts of the proponents of these resolutions to spell out limits to such a convention, there is no guarantee that such limits would be legally binding. No one knows whether the courts would uphold the limitations on the topics proposed in the current bill. Could convention participants, chosen by an unknown process and subject to unspecified rules, actually decide to reverse the proposed rationale for a convention, thereby making the provisions of Citizens United permanent rather than overturning it? The League is also concerned over the damage a runaway convention could inflict on voting rights, civil rights, the fate of regulatory agencies such as the EPA and the FDA, and the separation of powers among the three branches of government. For these reasons, the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area urges this committee to reject the resolution proposed and to reject any other bills proposing an Article 5 constitutional convention. The very basis for our democracy is at risk with such proposals. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your time. Thank you to the entire panel for your time. Questions from the committee? All righty, seeing none. Just bear with us for 1 second. Representative Gentile.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Bellis and Vice Chair Capano, members of the committee. I'm here today to testify in support of several bills. I've filed written testimony on Bill H3819, an act to continue the Citizens Commission concerning a constitutional amendment to secure a government of the people, and filed written testimony on H3768, H3502, and Senate 2319. Thank you very much for taking me out of turn today. The act to continue the Citizens Commission to secure government of the people was in 2018, we had a general election which with over 71% of voters, or 1,871,989 voters in Massachusetts casting their ballots in favor of question 2 to create this commission. The commission was created and issued recommendations on how to advance a constitutional amendment to undo the political financial corruption spawned by the Supreme Court's Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission case. And incidentally, the commission considered all of the arguments that you've heard earlier today against an Article 5 convention. We had law professors from Harvard University, other universities, experts in the field, testimony from people throughout the Commonwealth. We had over 20 hearings, and we decided that to go forward in support of the bill that you have before you today for asking for an amendment, and with the Congress failing to issue an amendment, having a calling for a constitutional convention. It was my privilege to serve on the commission as one of Speaker DeLeo's appointees. And this bill, House 3819, was actually passed by the committee in the last session, and an amended, a slightly amended version was passed in the FY23 budget. However, Governor Baker sent it back, and that's why I'm here today, to ask for your support once again so that we can get over the finish line and allow the commission to get about its business. We've had at least 5 vacancies on the 15-member commission. They haven't been filled, and we need this bill in order to fill those vacancies to continue forward. Governor Healey's been a strong supporter of the commission, and so I thank you very much. Urge your favorable report on the bill and the other bills noted, and happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Questions from the committee, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. To my colleague, the concerns that have been raised about the bills like this, you've mentioned and you've dealt with. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Educate others?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the Congress has received perhaps about 400 bills for a constitutional convention on this or that issue, okay? And, you know, if you totaled them all up, I mean, there'd be enough states to call a constitutional convention. But, you know, we're asking for a limited convention just focusing on campaign finance. And other requests by states for constitutional conventions, again, they're for limited purposes. You know, so the bottom line is that we will not have a convention unless we have 34 states asking for it, and we're asking for a limited convention. Other states, at least 4 other states, have asked for the same limited convention. And in the event that we get 34 states, we'll have it, and it'll be limited to that convention, to that issue, those issues, campaign finance. If, you know, a lot of those against the bill would say, well, we don't know what would happen in a limited convention. Well, you know, we really, we spent a couple of years looking at that, and we came down, the commission came down on that we can go forward. And in fact, we have several amendments to our Constitution that started out with the process of asking for a constitutional convention. When they got close to having the number of states sign on, the Congress acted, just as this legislature acts if we have a ballot question and we want to resolve it the way we want to resolve it rather than the way the ballot has done that. We did that, for example, when we raised the minimum wage 5 years ago. And thank you. Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? All righty, seeing none. Representative, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you, members.
All righty, next up we have Lee Mondale testifying virtually. Lee Mondale? All right, moving on. How about Frank Kashner, also virtual?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I appear as an individual citizen, and it breaks my heart to oppose H 3502 because I totally believe in the cause of reversing Citizens United decision. But I don't believe that there's anything that can stop a runaway convention. I don't support the legislation because it contains a possible conversion to a petition to Congress to call what it calls a limited Article 5 Convention of the States. There is no precedent for a limited Convention of the States. And indeed, even with 34 co-signers, nothing stops some number of them from changing their minds and changing the rules of the convention. Constitutional scholars have stated that it is clear that any limits on the convention will not hold. Article 3502 runs the risk that those who meet could change the rules. In 2016, the Convention of States Action Group, and I invite you all to look it up, a billionaire Koch-funded 50-state initiative met in colonial Williamsburg and conducted a simulation of what an actual convention might be like. They practiced destroying, according to one of their leaders, 115 years of progressive federal government and legislation. They want to remove every aspect of 115 years of government that helps ordinary citizens, like the New Deal, civil rights, the progressive era, the EPA. They are also claiming that any Article 5 convention request to Congress supports their call, whether or not intended by the authors of this or any other request. I also encourage you to visit the Heritage Foundation website, where they make their intentions perfectly clear. Please reject H 3502 to protect both the United States and to give the authors of the bill a chance to reintroduce it, omitting any possible call for an Article 5 Convention of the States. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions from the group? All righty, seeing none. Thank you very much for your time today. All right, next up, we are now moving into panels. So panel 3, Convention of States, I have Jessica Burchin, Barbara Brenton, Steve Kloutman, and Don Cole, and I am going to apologize as we get into this. I will no doubt mispronounce many people's names, so please don't take offense. Thanks for joining us today.
I would just like to thank the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak today on behalf of H 3541. I am Jessica Burchin, and I am from West Springfield. Ladies and gentlemen of this committee, the resolution before you, H 3541, provides the General Court with another opportunity to reaffirm the Commonwealth's traditional role in securing and advancing first principles of self-government. The principles of government by consent of the governed have been articulated in these halls, just these halls in Massachusetts, by the most renowned and celebrated statesman of Massachusetts. Just prior to his January 1961 inauguration as 35th President of this Republic, John F. Kennedy addressed a joint session of the General Court. He reminded the Assembly that during his time as United States Representative and Senator, he had, quote, been guided by the standard John Winthrop set before his shipmates on the flagship Arbella. We must always consider that we shall be a city on a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, end quote. Those members of the Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs who voted to move this resolution for broader consideration here embodied another historic standard recalled by the President-elect. Quote, for what Pericles said to the Athenians has long been true of this Commonwealth. We do not imitate, for we are a model to others, end quote. President-elect Kennedy argued that public officials would be measured by, among other qualities, whether you, quote, were truly men of dedication, with an honor mortgaged to no single individual or group, and compromised by no private obligation or aim, but devoted solely to the public good and the national interest, end quote. We believe that calling a convention of states to limit the power and scope of the federal government is in full service to the public good and national interest. Now, you have the opportunity to build upon the foundation established by your colleagues to meet the historic standards set by this state and truly make Massachusetts a model to others. Thank you again for allowing me this time, and I strongly urge you to vote favorably to pass this through the committee.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Barbara Brenton. I'm from Halifax. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I thank you for this opportunity to give testimony in support of H.3 541, calling for a convention of states. By any objective measure, a significant and significantly growing majority of Americans believe that our republic has veered completely off course, far afield from the principles and limitations established by the United States Constitution. Not only has the federal government long strayed from its enumerated powers, but it has also become totally incompetent. That incompetence can be measured in wasted lives, trillions of wasted dollars in debt, and the erosion of the liberty of Americans, of every American citizen. Instead of a limited government dedicated to sustain an ordered liberty, the federal government has descended into a lawless oligarchy that regularly abuses its power and divides the citizenry. Too many in the federal government, regardless of the party, act as rulers rather than representatives and see constituents not as fellow citizens but as subjects who are to be mastered. This is in spite of the fact that, as a philosopher Russell Kirk wrote, quote, our Constitution is Republican, designed to secure the public good through the sharing of political power among many people, end of quote. In this republic, the people are sovereign, and now in great and growing numbers, the people are prepared to peacefully and lawfully reclaim our authority. That reclamation begins with utilizing the constitutional mechanism put in place to address the expansion of federal power and the abuse thereof. This document is submitted as testimony in support of H.3 541 to advance the activation of Article 5 of the United States Constitution for the purposes of calling a convention of states to discuss and propose amendments limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. It will explain the origin and purpose of Article 5 and some of the reasons why supporters of a convention of states believe it is necessary, and what you are being asked and not asked to do. So I thank you very much all again for allowing me to give this testimony today in support of H.3 541, and would appreciate a yes vote supporting the resolution.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you. My name is Stephen Kloutman of Hanson. It's an honor to speak before you in favor of H.3 541. Article 5 of the Constitution provides the sovereign citizens, through our state legislatures, the method by which to return to first principles of a balanced and limited government. Put crudely, Article 5 is the break glass in case of emergency option for the states. We are in such an emergency. Article 5 outlines two methods for amending the Constitution. The second is our focus. It states that Congress, quote, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, end quotes. Years prior to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Virginia delegate Colonel George Mason had written the initial draft of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, the first document in history that recognized the rights of the individual citizen as sovereign. During the Constitutional Convention, Mason insisted upon preventing what could be termed as a runaway Congress from blocking the right of the people to amend the proposed Constitution. The notion that the states, without interference from Congress, would have the ability to rebalance constitutional order was presented as part of the Virginia Plan, which was authored by James Madison and heavily influenced by Mason. John Adams would echo this vital emphasis on balance in the construction of the federal government in his work, Defense of the Constitution, to which this document will later refer. Some delegates to the convention believed that any such language as contained in the Virginia Plan to be unnecessary. However, as Madison noted, quote, Colonel Mason urged the necessity of such a provision. The plan now to be formed will certainly be defective, as the Confederation has been found on trial to be. Amendments will therefore be necessary, and it will be better to provide for them in an easy, regular, and constitutional way than to trust chance and violence. It would be improper to require the consent of the national legislature because they may abuse their power and refuse their consent on that very account, end quote. Mason, ever skeptical of overarching centralized power and all too familiar with the temptation of mortal men when met with wielding such power, would not be moved. He emphatically asked, why would a central government that becomes tyrannical ever propose legislation or amendments to restrain its tyranny? I thank the committee for its time, and I urgently ask for your support of H3541. Thank you.
Now, is there one, we have someone else scheduled to testify? Is it Don Cole? Oh, okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before, questions? Questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen of this committee, my name is Donald E. Cole from Peabody, Massachusetts. I do thank you for this opportunity to give my testimony in support of H3541, calling for a convention of the states. In continuing, the second clause, Article 5, was included and, according to James Madison, approved unanimously and without debate. Colonel Mason's persistence was a wise and noble gift. We must put that inheritance to good use. As Mason and many others, including Adams, feared, the federal government has indeed become outsized, wasteful, and thoroughly corrupt, a soft tyranny transforming into something worse. An Article 5 Convention of States is necessary to propose limits upon the government to benefit all citizens. Politicians and power brokers of all stripes in Washington and elsewhere enjoy appealing to the fallacy that the United States is a democracy. This or that piece of legislation or statement or social media post is, quote, a danger to our democracy, unquote. Quote, democracy dies in darkness, says one well-known newspaper. We do not live in a democracy. As Adams said, no democracy can ever exist or can exist, quote unquote, Fisher Ames of Dedham, who would serve in the Massachusetts Convention that ratified the Constitution and as a U.S. representative, was even more explicit. Quote, "Our disease is democracy. It is not the skin that festers. Our very bones are carious, and that marrow blackens with gangrene. Which rogues shall be first is no moment," unquote. The United States was constructed as a representative republic with all power not explicitly given to the federal government, granted to the several states. But this arrangement has become inverted. As Calvin Coolidge said to the Massachusetts State Senate upon his election as President of the Senate, quote, "The latest, most modern, and nearest perfect system that statesmanship has devised is representative government. No nation has discarded it and retained its liberty. Representative government must be preserved." Thank you very much for your hard work and your thoughtfulness in considering H3541. Clearly seeing H3541's value, I urge you to wholeheartedly support this resolution, Resolution H3541. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Thank you very much for your time and being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, from the panel. All right, next up, we have panel 4. Kathy Dugan, Connett, I can't read my own writing, Brian Hemingway, and Pete Hunt. Thank you.
Hi, I am Kathleen Dugan from Carver, Mass., and I'd like to thank the members of the committee for taking time today to listen to and consider our testimonies in behalf of H3541 resolution. Thank you. An Article 5 Convention of States would certainly discuss and propose an amendment or amendments that place restraints upon the power of the federal government to tax and to spend. The United States is broke. We are worse than broke. Currently, the debt is $33 trillion, with unfunded liabilities estimated to be as high as $150 trillion. Citizens helplessly watch continuing resolutions being enacted by Congress and signed by presidents of both major parties that violate the Budget Act. Debt ceilings are raised, and the term captures the absurdity. How many times have you raised the ceiling on your home? Coolidge put it quite elegantly in his autobiography, quote, "Both men and nations should live in accordance with their means and devote their substance not only to productive industry, but to the creation of various forms of beauty and the pursuit of culture which gives adornments to the art of life," unquote. Wise words from one of the most noblest men to have ever served in the government of Massachusetts. Today, money is printed uncontrollably by the federal government to adorn an ever-increasing benefits that discourage work and increase the tax burden on a populace already stretched to its limits. There is nothing beautiful or cultured about such an arrangement. While previous generations of Americans seem to sacrifice for others not yet born, our federal government seems to be on a quest to see what can be inflicted on those not yet born. Congress has consistently adopted gigantic omnibus spending bills. While relatively novel in the context of the full history of our republic, such bills have been passed for decades. In 1989, Congress pushed through a Budget Reconciliation Act that a then member described as, quote, "so voluminous that it was hauled into the chamber in an oversized box. Its thousands of pages, which the clerk hadn't even had time to number, had to be tied with a rope, like newspapers bundled for recycling. While reading it was obviously out of the question, it was true. I was permitted to walk around the box and gaze upon it for several angles, and even to touch it," unquote. An Article 5 Convention of States would most certainly consider an amendment or amendments that would require that general accepted accounting principles be forced upon the federal government, and a requirement that annual federal budgets be balanced. Once again, thank you for giving us your valuable time. I strongly urge you to fully support the proposed resolution H3541. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon. May it please the committee, my name is Kenneth Ehring, and I live in West Barnstable on beautiful Cape Cod. I thank you all for giving me and all of us the opportunity to read testimony in support of H3541, the Convention of States. During nearly a decade, as an employee at the U.S. Department of Defense, one of our COS, Convention of States volunteers, regularly witnessed the abhorrent waste of taxpayer funds firsthand. To cite just one example, a piece of research equipment requisitioned at a cost of $500,000 went unused for years. It was finally returned as, quote, excess equipment, end quote. $500,000 in exchange for nothing. The expenditure did not protect our border. It did not deter a terrorist attack. It did not bring any military personnel home. It was simply wasted. The only purpose that the equipment served was an attempt to justify the prevention of cuts to the defense budget. It is standard practice within the federal government to spend allocated funds on unnecessary items and services in order to extinguish those funds and ensure that the next year's budget is not cut and perhaps increased. Our volunteer has read numerous email alerts sent by the heads of finance divisions that urge Department of Defense employees to purchase equipment and supplies to exhaust all available funds. In the examples cited, $500,000 can be a decade or more of salary for many, yet the federal government nonchalantly considers such a sum to be of relative insignificance. This is just one line item within one division, within one federal agency. It is self-evident that this is a broken system. We are robbing untold numbers of generations to fund waste and sloth. Prior to our volunteer's time in government, he wondered where trillions of dollars could have gone. He no longer wonders. That is why, in part, he and millions of others support an Article 5 Convention of States. We must at least consider and propose restraints such as balanced budget amendments and the application of generally accepted accounting principles to stop and prevent such waste and abuse in the federal government. Thank you again for allowing me to address this committee today. I appreciate your time and attention. And to this most important matter, and I strongly ask that you pass this resolution in support of H3541, the Convention of States. And I'm sorry I went over a little bit.
Thank you for your time.
I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of this committee. I want to first start off by saying thank you for allowing me to give testimony today on behalf of H3541. My name is Brian Hemingway, and I'm from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Read the op-ed section of most any local newspaper on any given day, and you will likely find calls for term limits for members of Congress. An Article 5 Convention of States will certainly address such calls and reasons for congressional term limits, which are legion. Thomas Jefferson claimed in personal correspondence that, quote, I have the consolation of having added nothing to my private fortune during my public service and of retiring with hands as clean as they are empty, end quote. So wrote the author of the Declaration of Independence. Anyone remotely familiar with Jefferson's financial troubles knows that he was telling the truth and likely one of the most needy in money among his peers in government. Yet read those words aloud today to a group of contemporary members of Congress and they would likely burst out laughing. Jefferson, what a fool. Countless members of Congress have dirtied their hands while adding plenty to their private fortunes during their time in office. Time that expands due to the advantages of incumbency. Those members would do well to be reminded of Calvin Coolidge's 1919 message to this general court when vetoing a proposed salary increase. In it, he reiterates the first principles of the citizen legislator that the founders envisioned, the diametric opposite of the parasites devouring their host that comprise most of the United States Congress today. The same body that the Convention of States movement intends to and will bypass. Service, quote, service in the general court is not obligatory but optional. It is not to be undertaken as a profession of a means of livelihood. Quote, the place each member of the general court will hold in the estimation of his constituents will never depend on his salary, but on the ability and integrity with which he does his duty, not on what he receives, but on what he gives. And only out of the bountifulness of his own giving will his constituents raise him to power. Unable or unwilling to heed Coolidge's words, members of Congress have developed a disturbing faculty for treating federal funds as a personal bank under the cover of bearing gifts to their constituencies. Again, I'd like to thank the committee and say I ask for your support in favor of H3541. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just so folks know who are here, we do now have a fourth chair here. I know there's a lot of panels with 4 folks if you want to come up here and use that chair. Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunt? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pete Hunt. I'm from Masonit. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present this testimony in support of H3541. Consider the case of former Senate Budget Committee Chairman who earmarked $66 million in the Treasury funds to convert an Air Force base into a business park. That business park just happened to be developed by the senator's brother. The senator also happened to have invested somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million in the project, eventually raking in hundreds of thousands on those investments. The senator answered questions about such earmarks by saying he had not broken any of the Senate's ethics rules. Quite true, and the absolute problem. Congress makes the rules and comically polices, quote, itself. Legislating in such a fashion is not in line with the principle of equality before the law. It establishes a hierarchy of privilege and influence. Insiders, wealthy corporations armed with lobbying divisions, and political donors are granted exemptions and or benefits that most citizens do not enjoy. Any mandate or law that is not equally applied is invalid and unacceptable. And in legislating in such fashion, members of Congress need only worry about preferred clients, donors who can assist with the primary objective, re-election. The advantage of incumbency are endless. Name recognition and fundraising build upon themselves over the years, making it difficult for even the most able of citizens to make elections competitive. As alluded to earlier, entrenched members of Congress in both of the major parties are often award monies and rights to family members and preferred constituencies that can assist them in holding and increasing power. The seniority system in Congress rewards longevity with committee chairmanships or ranking minority status on committees, regardless of competence or fidelity to the Constitution. Once again, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to provide this testimony in support of H 3541 and urge each of the members of the committee to vote in favor of this resolution.
Thank you, sir. Questions, members of the committee? Thank you very much for your time today. All righty, next up, we have Jane Laborde, Mark Marshall, Bill Matheson, and Eric Machino. Welcome. Hello.
Start?
No, please, by all means, begin. Thank you for joining us.
Greetings, committee members. My name is Jane Laborde. I'm from Granby. Thank you for allowing me to testify in favor of support of H 3541. Many of the framers of the Constitution did not envision such concentration and continuation of power. If they had, they would have never bothered with George III in the first place. Jefferson expressed disapproval to James Madison in December 1787 concerning the lack of term limits for the then proposed Constitution, yet rotation was well observed and respected by the members of Congress until 1901 and the dawn of what was called the Progressive Movement. At that point, most members of Congress did not seek re-election after one term. By custom, one such congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln served only one single term by choice. As he demonstrated, rotation in office did not ban individuals from public affairs. Term limits would merely place what has become a necessary restraint upon endless federal office holding. Political careerism and advantages of incumbency necessitate a need for Article 5 Convention of States to consider a constitutional amendment that places term limits upon members of Congress. Self-term limiting was also exhibited in the office of presidency. Presidents faithfully adhered to the standards set by George Washington until Franklin D. Roosevelt defied it in 1940, necessitating the ratification of the 22nd Amendment in 1951, codifying the two-term limit for presidents. Because there is no such amendment for the House and Senate, the advantages of incumbency and the ability to direct gifts from the Treasury and amass in power has fostered hundreds of careerists in Congress. They claim unlimited power, vote themselves pay raises, and exempt themselves from legislation they pass, proving George Mason's point over and over. Congress, as presently constructed, would never consent to limiting the power and privilege. Thank you for allowing me to testify today in support of H 3541. I request you also support H 3541 to save our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Mark Marshall from Middleborough, and I appreciate you giving me time today to give my testimony on behalf of H 3541. John Adams was not only one of the most accomplished politicians the Commonwealth has produced, but one of the most far-seeing political philosophers. Of such power and privilege that you just heard about, he wrote, quote, "It is weakness rather than wickedness which renders men unfit to be trusted with unlimited power. The passions are all unlimited. Nature has left them so. If they could be bounded, they would be extinct. If they surrender the guidance for any course of time to any one passion, they may depend upon finding it, in the end, a usurping, domineering, cruel tyrant. They were intended by nature to live together in society and in this way to restrain one another," unquote. Term limits would limit power and passion and force careerists to emulate Lincoln. and find other outlets for their ambition. Establishing such limits would more precisely align the Constitution with the philosophy and principles of limited government favored by most of the founders. It would also result in the election of true citizen legislators who work not to secure the next victory and sinecure, but the hard-won liberty of the people. The unreadable bills mentioned earlier, cobbled together by unelected staffers and money-no-object lobbying operations, are not reflective of representative government and are, in fact, contributing to its demise. As a late congressman who was in office for 47 years said of one 3,000-page monstrosity, quote, "I love these members. They get up and say, 'Read the bill.' What good is reading the bill if it's 1,000 pages and you don't have two lawyers to find out what it means after you read the bill," unquote. It's true. No legislator can read or comprehend the bills on which he or she is voting when they are so large. That is why most of those responsibilities should be left to the state and local governments to consider. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I appreciate your time today, appreciate all your hard work, and ask that you please vote favorably for H 3541.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I appreciate this chance to come before you and speak in support of H 3541. An Article 5 Convention of States considering amendments to restrain the federal government might also consider repealing the 17th Amendment to restore balance to Congress and give back to the states their proper seat in federal affairs. Adams wrote of the significance of balance in his defense of the Constitution of the United States. Quote, "Where the people have a voice and there is no balance, there will be everlasting fluctuations, revolutions, and horrors until a standing army with a general at its head commands the peace or the necessity of an equilibrium is made appear to all and is adopted by all," unquote. Senators were to be the voice, would be the voice of you, the state legislators in Washington. They were to provide necessary checks upon the executive and quell the potential tyranny of the majority in the House. The 17th Amendment, written and ratified in so-called populist progressive movement of the early 20th century, obliterated that arrangement. Upon its April 8th, 1913 ratification, senators were transformed from ambassadors to free agents, and they have largely acted as such ever since. This stands against the founders' vision and has come at a great cost to the two houses of Congress. State sovereignty and Republican government, direct election of senators was said to be more democratic than the language of Article 1 of the Constitution. But the founders, as noted earlier, did not establish a pure democracy. They established a federal republic and wrote the Constitution accordingly. Thank you again for your time. And I'd like to make one additional point that has come to mind as I listen. There's question raised as to who gets to choose and who's going to run the thing and run this a convention of the states. In fact, you get to choose who the delegates are. And especially the commissioners. There's delegates and there's commissioners. And you get to choose the commissioners and you issue the commission. You tell them what you want them to do. The legislature of the state of Massachusetts gets to do that. You can pull, the legislature can pull anyone who acts outside of the role that they were assigned. So thanks again for listening to me and for my little diatribe there. And
Thank you.
Please vote in favor of House Bill 3451.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, representatives and senators on the committee. My name is Eric Moschino. I'm from Plymouth, Massachusetts. I'm also here to offer testimony on H3541. It is difficult to argue against the assertion that the United States Supreme Court has become totally unmoored from its original purpose. Justices and federal judges are accorded undue reverence and significance. They increasingly encroach upon the lives of sovereign citizens, yet matters of commerce, liberty, and life and death were not to be in the hands of a few robed attorneys. How did this come to pass, and what can be done about it? Judicial independence is vital in a constitutional republic. This was recognized by those who foresaw the incremental expansion of judicial power. One of those was Brutus, writing in Anti-Federalist 13. Brutus, who was thought to be New York Judge Robert Yates, was particularly concerned about how the expansion of judicial power would impact the states. He wrote, quote, "Perhaps nothing could have been better conceived to facilitate the abolition of the state governments than the constitution of the judicial. They will be able to extend the limits of the government, of the general government gradually and by insensible degrees, and to accommodate themselves to the temper of the people. Their decisions on the meaning of the Constitution will commonly take place in cases which arise between individuals, with which the public will not be generally acquainted. One adjudication will form a precedent to the next, and this to a following one," end quote. As is evident, and as Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion in the infamous case Marbury v. Madison demonstrated, Yates was proven correct. Marbury confirmed the assertion made by Yates and expanded the authority of the court. As Marshall wrote in his opinion, the judicial power of the United States is extended to all cases arising under the Constitution. The expansion of power, unauthorized in the Constitution or by any subsequent amendment, resulted in disastrous interpretations and rulings. Consider the most obvious: then Justice Roger Taney's terrible decision and reasoning in the Dred Scott case of 1856. Taney and a few other justices ruled Scott, a slave, had no standing to sue for his freedom. This did much to bring about the Civil War. Ruling after ruling and edict after edict has followed. Again, folks, I thank you for your time, and I urge you to vote favorably on H3541.
Questions from the committee? Please. I believe there might be two more. Thank you very much for your testimony today. All righty, next up we have Mike Quinn, Becky Snow, Christy Stefano, and Steve. Welcome. Please.
My name is Michael Quinn. Thank the committee members for allowing me to speak in support of Resolution H3541. One of the worst decisions the court ever made was in the 1942 case Wicked versus Filburn. The court ruled that the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution enveloped interstate commerce. Nowhere in the Constitution is this power granted. This increased the power and scope of federal agencies to regulate commerce in an extra-constitutional fashion. Wicked established the dangerous and evil precedent that the federal government can deny access to something or prevent the individual from saying no. Wicked involved a farmer who grew excess wheat that he was not planning to sell and for which he was going to use on his own land. Not trading across state or county lines, the court deemed his choice to have somehow impacted demand, and that the government could compel economic consumption. This is a gross violation of not only the language of the Constitution, but of individual liberty and decision-making, the creation of serfs. Because of the undue and unconstitutional influence given the Supreme Court, nominations and confirmations regarding the lifetime appointment of potential Supreme Court justices have taken on a dramatic importance that is out of proportion for a representative government by an order of magnitude. This usually devolve into circuses and further divide the republic. Federal judicial nominees are portrayed as divinely inspired or evil incarnate. Neither is true. Judges are fallible human beings to whom excess power should never be given, particularly if it is unchecked by those who abdicate their constitutional duty to balance and see the court as God. And I'd like to thank the committee to support us and to join us in this cause. Thank you again for the time. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Tribbestone. I am from Harwich, and I'm here to speak in favor of H3541. Instead of a people governed by a document that can be held between thumb and forefinger, American citizens are ruled by an ever-expanding annotated constitution. It weighs 10 pounds and comprises thousands of pages of interpretations of the Constitution by the Supreme Court. It is the product of the expansion of judicial power that began with Marbury versus Madison, tangible proof of the all-encompassing federal government. That government has fostered a loss of confidence in the sovereignty of this republic, publishing ever-increasing burdens upon the individual and the small business person. It has produced bulky legislation, spilling over hundreds or thousands of pages, and contrived thousands upon thousands of regulations in the Federal Registry. It employs legions of lawyers to interpret such regulations and has permitted swarms of compliance officers to brandish them like a sword. It has yawned at the piling up of debt and erosion of the credit of the United States, accepting and encouraging judicial fiat and creeping encroachment into the private affairs of citizens and private institutions. Taken as a whole, the federal government now, quote, covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated rules. This will of man is not shattered, but softened, bent, and guided. Men are seldom forced by it to act, but they are constantly restrained from acting. Such a power compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people, till each nation is reduced to nothing better than a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which the government is the shepherd, end quote. That was the French writer and philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville in the early 19th century unknowingly describing today's United States. Such an environment drains the spirit of independence nobly won by our forefathers and successfully defended by their descendants. It drains the spirit of self-respect, sensitivity to one's neighbors, and the proper relationship between citizen and government that is vital to liberty. Now it is time to restrain the federal government from acting beyond its bounds. The states can and must do so. Article 5 grants that power. Thank you very much for your time, and I would again like to ask that you support H3541. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Christy Stefano. I'm a resident of West Springfield, and I'm speaking in support of H3541. In the 1970s, political scientist Theodore Lowy pointed out that when Congress established the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, it did not explicitly state any policy goals for those agencies, nor provide any standards for their operation or conduct. These agencies were given a free pass to make it up as they went. The fourth branch of government, the administrative state, was never intended to exist. The rule of the administrative state is anti-constitutional and allows for a vast array of policymaking. It is an oligarchy, meaning a rule by a few for their own purposes and supported by interest groups. This leads to the disenfranchisement of the sovereign citizen. Congress further ignores its role by permitting the president to issue executive orders that are often extra-constitutional in nature and practice. Such orders and regulations, no matter who is issuing them, can undo decades of positive accomplishments in weeks or months. They are not subject to review or rebuke by the sovereign people. This abandonment of proper roles and duties violates one of the most fundamental principles of limited government and ordered liberty. Even if, amid the monstrous bills passed by Congress, there are provisions that are outlawed, federal agencies can put them back in because of the authority granted to secretaries of those agencies. In any given piece of legislation, there are hundreds of references to the secretary shall, or the secretary may, or the secretary determines. Who elected these secretary to shall, may, or determine anything? An Article 5 Convention of States would likely consider amendment or amendments limiting the power and scope of the federal bureaucracy, likely via a requirement that Congress be made to reauthorize individual departments by standalone reauthorization bills every 2 to 3 years. Please, I respectfully ask that you vote in favor of H 3541. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? All right, now, is there one other person from, yes? All right, please, come on up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Holly Say, and I'm a resident of Abington, Massachusetts. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to give testimony today in favor of H 3541. The strength of the Republic depends upon adherence to the first principles that were largely established by the leading lights of this Commonwealth, including Calvin Coolidge, who said, quote, "Resistance to tyranny is obedience to law, and obedience to law is to liberty," end quote. The federal government in its current form is a tyranny, dispensing unequal justice under the color of law, often the color of regulation or judicial fiat. We are demanding that our federal government adhere to those principles in asking you to again pick up the standard that was set in Massachusetts. We are asking you to exercise the power given to you through us in Article 5. We do not seek to overthrow the government, disfigure the Constitution, or withdraw or consent to be governed. Ours is a nonpartisan and nonviolent effort dedicated to strengthening the Constitution by returning power not granted to the federal government back to the several states where it belongs. But do not mistake our civility for casual purpose or lack of deep anger. We are joined by millions of citizens whose patience is not wearing thin, but at an end. No federal representative, senator, president, judge, or bureaucrat has the authority to stray from fidelity to the Constitution. Citizens who consent to be governed delegate our authority by communicating how we wish to be represented. We are communicating our support for this resolution. We urge that it be moved to the floor or referred to another committee so that the whole of the General Court and the whole of the Commonwealth can engage and be heard. I want to thank the committee again for letting me testify today, and I strongly urge you to support H 3541. Thank you again.
And thank you. I just want to make sure, because that I don't mess this up. We had another panel with, okay, all right. All right, so please, the other members. So I have Amy Trout, Holly, Dave Wilder, and Katrina Russell. Please, come up. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Good afternoon, everybody.
It is certainly a great privilege in our great nation to have our voice heard at this hearing here today and all other ways that our voice can be heard freely. So may it ever be. I, Amy L. Troop of Halifax, am here today in support of H3541. How it works. Amending the Constitution is rightly an involved and difficult process that must clear significant hurdles. Upon 34 state legislators agreeing to the adoption of the Uniform Convention of States resolution that has been introduced. 1. Congress is required by Article 5 to call a convention of states. 2. All 50 state legislators name commissioners to the convention as each legislator sees fit. 3. The Convention of States is limited in purpose, again, limited in purpose, that is, to discuss and propose amendments to the United States Constitution that narrow the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. 4. Should a majority of the states agree to one or any of the proposed amendments, Congress can either direct the state legislators to vote upon those amendments or establish ratification conventions in each state to debate and vote upon the ratification of the proposed amendments. 5. As stipulated by the Constitution, 3/4 of the states, 38 states, must ratify an amendment or amendments to be added to the Constitution. Suggestions that a convention of states would nullify or disfigure the Constitution are unfounded. A convention of states is not a constitutional convention such as that of 1787. As outlined, 38 states must ratify a proposed amendment to add it to the Constitution. Furthermore, if an Article 5 Convention of States could so easily alter or erase the Constitution, why would the mechanism have been included in the original document? As Madison argues in Federalist 43, quote, "It was requisite, therefore, that a mode for introducing amendments should be provided. The mode preferred by the convention seems to be stamped with every mark of propriety. It guards against that extreme facility which would render the Constitution immutable. It moreover equally enables the general and the state governments to originate the amendment of errors as they may be pointed out by experience on one side or the other. Your support for this resolution merely advances it to the larger legislative body for further discussion and reasonable debate. It does not establish or even advance a call for a constitutional convention. A convention of states is not a constitutional convention. It does do the bidding of the people to advance a conversation among and between the sovereign constituents and their state representatives about how best to rein in the federal government and assert for the Commonwealth with the responsibilities and power designated to it by the founders." Thank you for listening. I know I went a lot over, but there is very big things to consider here, and we need to save our nation under God. I really pray that you'll support H3541.
Thank you.
You go next. I have one right, so if you want to. I'm last.
But I have one right. Okay. All right, I'm going a little off script here and wrote my own, so let me find your notes. Yes. All right. Hi, my name is Katrina Russell. I am from Methuen. I want to thank you for hearing our testimony on H3541. This country is at war with itself, each tribe trying to destroy each other. But the one thing everyone can agree on is that they hate government, especially the federal government and especially Congress and bureaucrats. Everyone in this country is here because someone somewhere chose to leave behind the land that they were born to, the land that their family, and they left the land of their family and looked for a better place, more opportunity, more freedom. This country was built on self-governance, and it's the reason people still flock here today. The government in this country is chosen by the citizens not to lead us by proxy, but to implement the will of the people who elected them. No one knows this better than the people of the Massachusetts. Massachusetts was the first colony to fight back against the British. When others hear about Lexington and Concord, they have an idea of the shot heard around the world. But I was born in one town and I work in another. When others hear of Bunker Hill, they know something about a battle of some kind. We know there's a community college there that helps the next generation find their path. In fact, Massachusetts has more colleges than any other state, more education, and of course, the best sports teams. We know what it means to fight and win. We also know what it means to make decisions for ourselves and not depend on the federal government. We were the first to have our own socialized health care, Mass Health. We were the first to legalize gay marriage. Long before any president entered office in agreement, we were the first to decriminalize marijuana, putting effort on rehabs over jail. Not everyone agrees with everything, but our state decided it themselves. The federal government has never known what we need. The federal government has become a group of oligarchies who vote on whomever gives them the most money so they can retain power. We need to enforce term limits for members of Congress and bureaucrats who they appoint, including the Supreme Court. The federal government is the government of the people, not the government of the elite. We need to make them balance the budget. They always talk about how they won't be able to pay their creditors if we don't increase the debt ceiling. No, we pay our creditors. We won't be able to add to their pet projects if we don't increase the credit limit. My son is 10 years old and loves memes. When he was 8, he told me he made up one about a good parent who tells their kid that they can't afford a big vacation, but will take a smaller one instead, compared to the bad parent who says, well, I managed to save $6,000 and the vacation's only $5,000, so let's go, forgetting all the other expenses that go along with it. The federal government in this tale is the bad parent. Only in this case, it's the reverse. The government isn't using their own money. They're using ours. They are the children making the decisions with none of the consequences. My 10-year-old knows how to save for the future, and he's already starting to. And the federal government is already spending it. Again, I want to thank you for your time, and please consider voting yes for H3541.
Thank you.
My name is Dave Wilder from Somerset, Massachusetts. I was sitting here, and forgive me, I've become more grateful for the time that you guys do sitting here. I honor your service, and while I was sitting here, I was thinking, why am I here? You know, the last name on the Founders Memorial in Plymouth is a Wilder. My grandfather served in the First World War. My father served in the Second World War in Germany. But patriotism takes many forms, including honest conversation and debate about what is wrong with our country and how it can be peacefully resolved in a way that benefits all citizens. Supporters of an Article 5 Convention of States believe in the design, necessity, and process of Article 5. Your support of this resolution is an important step in reclaiming limited government by, of, and for the people. Our spirit is that of Massachusetts farmer Levi Preston. His stated motivation for having fought in the American Revolution echoes across the centuries. It animates our efforts and may animate your support for this resolution as well. Why did he fight? Well, he said, against the most powerful military in the world, he put it, quote, "We had always governed ourselves, and them redcoats meant that we shouldn't," end quote. You can reaffirm what President-elect Kennedy called to mind in this building in January '61, quote, "Concerning matters essential to the self-government and orderly liberty, Massachusetts is a model to all and serves as a beacon for our sister states," end quote. Supporters of an Article 5 Convention of States are confident that you have the courage, judgment, integrity, and dedication to let the light shine on the necessary conversation that must occur in order to protect and advance the first principles so long cherished, nurtured, and advanced here. You can perform the role of the founders, many of whom were also members of the state legislatures, envisioned for you to stand in the breach when the federal government exceeds its limits and becomes tyrannical, and to declare that the Constitution is not a dead letter. Thank you for the honor and for me fulfilling my duty of speaking to you. The Citizens Commission in 2019 concluded that Article 5 Convention is the way to go. Massachusetts formally declared that Washington can't fix itself, that the Article 5 resolution has to be performed in order to fix certain things in Washington. So it is my hope that you agree with that, and your energetic support will come behind H3541. Thank you so much.
Appreciate all of your testimony today. Thank you very much. Questions, please. Of course.
Powerful testimony. You know, I'm a proud Massachusetts born and raised man. And to have all you come in today from, I started making a list, Carver, Plymouth, Woonsocket, Granby, Middleborough, West Springfield, Abington, Halifax, Methuen, Somerset, Harwich, and of course, West Barnstable, one of my constituents. That's pretty special. We don't see that all the time, where people come from all over the Commonwealth. I commend you for that. I also love the part where you talked about Pericles being a Greek American. That meant a lot to me. President Kennedy and President Lincoln. It's pretty powerful what you've just taken the last hour or so to do. But the biggest concern that came up before you testified or during from others was that I'd like to just clarify. This bill that I filed talks about three things in specific: term limits, fiscal restraint, and limited government. It doesn't talk about anything else. And there was a concern, or is a concern, that it can be brought into other things. And I'd like if one of you can just clarify that. Can something like this intent be brought into another realm where we discussing different issues?
If I may, I think it was mentioned before that the state legislators select the commissioners, right? And the state the states determine what your commissioners to a convention would speak to. So right there, that's limitation number one, right? So we also recognize that Congress has proposed thousands of amendments. Only 27 have gotten into our Constitution. It's hard. We know it's hard. And so we know that the only things that are going to get through this struggle are things that are wildly popular with the American population. And those are the three things that we're standing for: term limits, fiscal responsibility, and stopping government overreach. We need to constrain them to what the Constitution allows. So that is enough to keep the conversation on track. I have a family of 4, and we can't agree on anything, including what's for dinner. So it's very difficult to come to a consensus. But those three topics have overwhelming, over 70% support of Americans. We also have the process of we need 34 to agree to assemble, and we need 38 states to ratify. What people also don't understand is in the Constitution, there is nothing to say how Congress shall run itself. So I could sit back here and say, wow, anything can go. They could do anything crazy. Well, in fact, they are. But a convention, a state convention, an interstate convention, or colonies, has happened over 600 times in our history. It's a well-worn path of legislative action. So I think the arguments against the Article 5 are difficult to understand. I think the Citizens Commission of Massachusetts was wise in its deliberations and research to conclude that if we're going to fix a lot of things in Washington, it has to be through an Article 5 convention. I think I've taken more of your time, but thank you so much.
Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely, Representative. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Alrighty. Thank you for your time. We're going to adjourn for 30 seconds.
All set. We're going to resume. I'd like to call Michael Farris, who's going to testify virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this committee allowing me to testify, and I testify on this subject all over the country, and I want to just commend you. You guys have showed extraordinary patience today in listening to all this, and I just really appreciate it. I am going to deal solely with the question of whether it can run away. Let me give you a little background. I'm a constitutional lawyer. I've argued successfully twice in the Supreme Court of the United States on constitutional issues. I have also argued successfully constitutional issue in Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, even though I'm from Virginia. And I have litigated a case under Article 5 concerning the process of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. The assertion that was made by several people earlier, more in relationship to the campaign finance issue, but the principles are the same, with whether or not a convention would be limited to its subject. The claim was made repeatedly that there is no precedent. Well, in a very technical, precise sense, that's true. Since we've never had a convention, there could never be a legal challenge to such a convention. But that doesn't mean, just because there's no specific precedent, doesn't mean that there's no general precedent. There is general precedent, and it's unassailable. And that all principally arises from the Equal Rights Amendment litigation. In that case, in that situation, Congress proposed the Equal Rights Amendment with a 7-year deadline. They purported to change the deadline and add 3.5 years on that. I was in that litigation representing legislators from the state of Washington. And then subsequently, in the last half dozen years or so, 3 states have claimed to ratify it despite the 7-year deadline, despite the expiration of the second deadline, and that's been litigated as well repeatedly. And every single court that has dealt with this issue has said that you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. If you say you're coming together for 7 years, it's 7 years. Republican appointed judges, Democratic appointed judges, every single judge has said you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. If you call a convention for a specific purpose, you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream and go off for a different purpose. The claim that this was done for the Constitutional Convention originally is a historical fallacy. I published an article in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy that refutes this. It's called Defying Conventional Wisdom. If you Google my last name, Farris, F-A-R-R-I-S, and Defying Conventional Wisdom, the article will come up readily on the internet for free. You can see that the original Constitutional Convention was not a runaway. The delegates obeyed their instructions that they got from their states. So the reason we have this convention is because Washington won't change itself. I don't care if the issue is term limits or balanced budget or campaign finance. You will be wishing and hoping forever if you expect Washington to fix any of these things, including campaign finance. The only way it's going to happen is to use the safety valves the framers gave us, and that is call a convention of states, and 38 states must ratify. The idea that someone said that they could change the ratification rule and not have 38 ratifications is not a serious statement. No lawyer would take that seriously. It's just simply fantasy land. I urge you to pass this 3541, and I thank you for your extraordinary patience.
Thank you for the testimony. Any questions from the committee? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'd like to call up Tara Hahn.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and the member of Joint Committee on Veteran and Federal Affairs. My name is Tara Hong from the 18 Middlesex and Low. Thank you for the opportunity to advocate for the passage of Resolution H3507, and that's 2326, a resolution condemning political oppression and encouraging free and fair election in Cambodia. I want to express my gratitude to State Representative Fernand Howard and Senator Ed Kennedy for putting forward this resolution, as well as all of those who have signed on to support it. this resolution upholds fundamental democratic principle, recognizing the importance of free and fair election and safeguarding citizen liberty and human rights. Since the Paris Peace Accord of 1991, over the years, significant international aid has been invested to promote a pluralistic, multi-party democratic system in Cambodia. However, despite those efforts, Prime Minister Hun Sen has maintained a stronghold on power since 1985, consolidating authority over every single level of national government. Even though now Hun Sen is no longer the Prime Minister of Cambodia, but the act of transferring his power to his son to be the new Prime Minister, it is not a democratic process as what they've been saying. This is a dictatorship act of maintaining the power in his family. Election in Cambodia since 19
You've been watching a Massachusetts Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs as they consider Article 5 resolution numbered H3541. That application would join the call already made by 19 states for an Article 5 convention for proposing term limits, fiscal restraints, and other limits on federal power. Lobbyists for George Soros-funded Common Cause and League of Women's Voters testified in opposition, reading the same talking points that they always use, the same talking points about a runaway convention and that the Constitution will be rewritten and that you can't trust Article 5 and you can't trust the wisdom of the Founding Fathers. That old trope came up over and over and over again. But then when it came time for our resolution, Representative Stephen Exaros, our primary sponsor, he spoke very eloquently about our resolution. And then we also heard expert testimony from Michael Farris and also testimony from so many volunteers and supporters in Massachusetts. It was incredible to hear such wonderful testimony, such glowing testimony from our supporters and volunteers. We're going to be getting reaction in just a moment, and then we're also going to hear from our regional director, Haley Shaw, who was there in Massachusetts and with the volunteers. So we'll be hearing from her in just a few moments. I want to point out before we get to Haley that there were at least 25 of our supporters and volunteers in that room. 25 people showed up to give testimony. They drove from all across the Commonwealth, and that was something that Representative Exaros pointed out at the very end of the testimony, that people from all over the Commonwealth came in support of our resolution. And again, that's H3541. And it's something that's not typical. He said that's something that they don't see very often. So many people coming up to support a bill that is before their committee. So that was really incredible. And I want to also point out just the difference between, the stark contrast between the opposition and our volunteers. The opposition, they used fear tactics, talked about historical inaccuracies. You know, when we have Haley Shaw, so I'll go to Haley, who is the regional director for Massachusetts. Haley, how are you feeling right now after sitting through that committee hearing?
Well, it got off to a weird start at first, but you know, the team was ready and prepared. So I'm really impressed, and I'm really proud of the team and what they did today. If you didn't know, we drove through a bunch of snow to get here, so it wasn't the easiest day to get to Boston. Nobody really lives in Boston on the team, and they came from a couple hours away, and that was the most impressive part, is that they committed to being here in person. But the committee was great. Our sponsor, Representative Zaros, was wonderful. He gave us a great opening. It was a little chaotic in the beginning. The chair of the committee wasn't there initially. He himself was stuck in traffic. So it kind of got off to a shaky start, but the team did a really wonderful job just coming together and keeping their composure and representing Massachusetts really well with a testimony that was a wonderful combination of history and current events. So the team has been practicing this testimony, just so everybody knows, since September. We had a surge day in early September, and then since then, they've been practicing this testimony every Sunday. And I have to give a little bit of an extra shout out to Matt May, who wrote our testimony. So the team has been working on that, but he's the person that actually wrote this. These are his words, and he studied a lot of history and put this together. So we have to give him a little bit of credit, but the team came together and presented it just amazingly. So
Hey, I just want to point out something that you said, because watching that hearing, you could see the stark contrast between our supporters and volunteers and the opposition that was there for the other Article 5 resolution, not ours, but the other one. And our volunteers, our supporters, they talked about history, they talked about the process, they talked about various founding fathers and the wisdom of founding fathers, like John Adams. I heard many founding fathers brought up. I heard Calvin Coolidge mentioned. It's clear to me that our supporters and the person who drafted this testimony really have a rich understanding of history and a deep understanding of the process of Article 5, which is so refreshing. Because what we heard from the opposition is completely fear tactics and fear mongering. Testimony. I mean, what can you say about the volunteers on the ground? I know that the testimony was in part written by someone else, but what can you say about the delivery of that testimony?
Everybody practiced this. Like I said, this has been 4 months, almost 5 months of weekly practice. Everybody knows every part inside and out because, we needed about 20 people to do the whole thing. And so everybody worked on various parts throughout the last 4 months. So the dedication has been amazing. In addition to everything else that the team does, which is local meetings. Massachusetts does a lot of local meetings, and they're really great with that. So the time and the dedication for this is, as the team says, this is their Super Bowl. So this was our Super Bowl. And so we're going to prepare and we're going to practice. And we brought on our game day faces and we were ready.
Yep, absolutely. What are some moments that stood out to you during the testimony?
I mean, I thought that it opened up amazingly. I thought that Jessica started it off really strong. And everybody did a wonderful job. We do have the best accents in COS, so I hope everybody appreciated that. We have the best accents. And then I was super impressed. We wrapped it up nicely, and our sponsor threw some questions at us, and Dave Wilder at the end, he answered those questions really amazingly. So there's no part in particular that sticks out because I thought the whole thing was amazing.
So what's going to be next for Massachusetts? What can we expect? When can we expect a vote, or when can we expect this to go to the next step?
We're not exactly sure. I think we're going to have to reach out to our sponsor, Representative Zaros, but also we have a pretty good relationship with the chair, Senator Velas. So hopefully between the two of them, we can get some information. We've passed this before, so we have that. It's a little bit nerve-wracking to have passed this and not sure what's going to happen this go around, but I'm really positive that we're going to pass out of this committee again. Just the dedication. I mean, we filled that hall. Everybody in there was Convention of States. So for them to recognize that people gave up their day to be here in Boston on a snow day, it's hard to ignore that.
One more question before I let you go. Can you just tell our viewers what are some updates that are going on in your region? Because you have Massachusetts, but you have several other states too. Can you tell us what else is going on in your region right now?
So I've got the Northeast Patriots. So we're New England and New York. We've just successfully filed in Rhode Island. So be on the lookout for hopefully a testimony soon in Rhode Island. In Connecticut, in New York, and also Massachusetts, we're gearing up for surge days. So if you're curious about those, reach out to those teams. We're trying to pack the state houses out here for all of our surge days and really just infiltrate with Convention of State supporters. those are the biggest things we've got going on. But as always, we're always busy, always have local meetings. So keep up with Convention of States on social media because we'll tell you what's going on.
Well, thank you so much, Haley, for joining us today, and thank you for all the time and dedication that you've poured into the Massachusetts team, and for being their leader, and for really just helping to galvanize the team to give just such an excellent testimony today. Thank you so much for all you're doing. Can't wait to see you on the road in your other states, and when you give testimony again in other states. So we'll have to have you back.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, well, we are going to sign off. Before we let you go, though, I want to make a small announcement about the future of COS Live. For the past 7 years, COS Live has existed as a weekly show wherein we give you COS news updates, play a game of Article 5 trivia, and interview a COS endorser, a legislator, COS staff member, or a volunteer. We have produced nearly 300 episodes, but as social media is changing, we want to do our best to serve you while also making the best of our staff resources. So the plan is that COS Live will continue to exist, but only with broadcasts like this one, where we provide supporters live coverage of legislative events for COS actions, such as hearings and floor debates. There will be some other new content to anticipate that we can tell you about, but just not quite yet. So stay tuned. We are excited about the changes and welcome your feedback on what you would most like to see from our social media platforms. Also, don't forget, Congressman Chip Roy will join the next COS edition of COS Live at Home on January 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register by going to www.conventionofstates.com/COS at Home. Check out new episodes of Crossroads on Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern Time with Mark Meckler and Rita. They're starting a new series on social justice. Tune in to The Battle Cry with Mark on Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and leave us a 5-star review on our podcast because that helps us reach more people and it helps us grow the show. We've got a country to save, so it's time to get back to work.